Hello and thanks for joining us. You're watching Middle East Now on I24 News. The headlines this hour. Several arrests in Spain and Germany linked to the manufacture of drones for Hezbollah. The organisation UN Watch publishes claims that the Lebanese judge in the ICJ case against Israel is biased. And 30 years after the bombing of a Jewish community centre in Buenos Aires, Argentina's president says he will pursue the Iranians behind it. Those are the top stories this hour. First, those senior members of both Hamas and Hezbollah were killed in IDF strikes in southern Lebanon today. This is 4 people were arrested in Europe in a plot linked to the manufacture of Hezbollah drones that have been used to attack Israel. Let's get the latest on all of that now with our correspondent in the north, Zach Anders. And Zach, first of all, tell us a bit more about the targets of today's IDF strikes in southern Lebanon.
Yeah, and we're hearing part of Hezbollah's engineering unit. Hezbollah has not come out and issued what they usually will, which is a photograph and his name, where he's from. That has not happened yet at this point in the afternoon, acknowledging the death. We have seen some images released from the scene. It appears that very rough videos surviving the initial impact of what appears to be an airstrike, and then a second airstrike hits this vehicle. We're still unclear. There's other people in the scene around when it looks like this is happening on a vehicle that's in movement. So still working to put together some of the pieces there. And obviously this is being reported in Lebanese media channels. But again, still trying to understand more about the dynamics that's taking place in southern Lebanon, an area where a lot of civilians have left. And primarily this is just Hezbollah controlling this territory. At least they've set up their own checkpoints and things like that along the roadways.
What about these arrests in Europe then, Zach? What does this tell us about the Iranian-backed group's international reach when it comes to getting hold of those drones that it uses to attack Israel?
It's a remarkable report. This is coming out of Spanish authorities had identified 4 individuals. Right now, we don't have the names, the nationalities, or the ages of these individuals. We also don't know. This entire scheme is predicated on a Lebanese company, a distribution company inside Spain that was working to package somehow these bits of small computer guidance systems, small electric motors. I need to stress that these are consumer-grade parts. So it's not like this is an effort to collect military-grade hardware, put it somehow, smuggle it through other shipments. No, this is rather just collecting things that you can buy yourself. But somewhere along the line, obviously, a red flag is raised, somebody buying all these things together. We really don't know specifically what led to their arrests. 3 of them arrested in Spain, the other arrested in Germany. And again, we don't know the nationalities, but somehow involved in this effort to send some of these parts that Hezbollah is using to build the drones on their end. Now, we should note that a lot of the drones that are built, whole, complete, are being shipped by Iran through this very porous border between Syria and Lebanon. But Hezbollah, on their own part, is taking a tactic out of the Ukraine playbook. They're building these drones themselves, and we've seen some of the videos that they posted themselves online. It's a really high-tech effort, but it proves that you can yourself produce some of these drones with consumer-grade parts, and then the drones that they are building, these small drones, single-engine, are capable of carrying sometimes as much as 1 pound, 2 pounds worth of explosives within the fuselage, and launched all over here in these communities in northern Israel.
Zach, thank you very much. Zach Anders there up in the north of Israel. Well, with me in the studio this hour, Ruth Wiseman is a former member of the Knesset. She's a research fellow at the Misgav Institute for National Security. Thank you very much for being with us, Ruth. Good to see you again. So as we heard there, there's still this kind of stalemate in the north, isn't there? We did see this really rapid escalation a few weeks ago. We saw vast swathes of the Galilee going up in flames. Just talk us through where we are now, and also what do you make of this glimpse that we've got into Hezbollah's international production capabilities?
Okay, so first of all, it seems that the policy is to tire or cause fatigue amidst Israelis, particularly amidst the social level, or rather the inhabitants of northern Israel. And this is the system that we can see. It's a very systematic, very specific model that the Iranians use wherever they go. They did this in Lebanon, disintegrated the country from within, causing different groups to fight one another, basically, and against their own government, and then economic disintegration. And finally, they come in as they thrive on this chaos and take over, basically, with their own proxies. They did this not only in Lebanon, but also in Syria. They did this in Yemen. They did this in Iraq. They are attempting to do this in Jordan as we speak. They tried to do this in the past in Egypt, but the Egyptians threw them out of that country. And what they are basically doing is the same thing within Israel. First of all, trying to send one group against another. And they have tried to do this, and they're trying to do this either with social media and espionage, etc. And this is exactly their model for emulation in each place. By the way, learned very well from the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union. But the Hezbollah is one of the mechanisms by which they go into Europe, for example, having dormant and some active cells throughout the continent, in the United States of America, and throughout the West. This is something that they do. By the way, extreme Islam on the other side, led by Qatar, Turkey, led by Erdogan, and others, they do the same thing, only with extreme Sunni Islam. Dormant cells, they act when they are activated. And that's what the Hezbollah is doing in terms of their commercial building of certain warfare, etc. By the way, one important fact to take into account is that one of the smuggling routes is via Jordan, of drugs and of parts for drones and for weapons in general. And the Jordanians finally came out, and the king said to the Iranians, enough is enough. Why? Because they felt that the Iranians were backing the Hamas to overthrow or to go against the Hashemite kingdom.
They have to walk a very difficult line, don't they,
exactly.
the Jordanians?
Exactly.
But we saw that
because of the population being very significantly Palestinian.
A large Palestinian majority there. But because the king of Jordan sought to embrace Syria's President al-Assad, didn't he? He was one of the figures who was really trying to bring him back into the fold. That does appear to have backfired to a certain extent.
Well, of course it would backfire. What happened with Assad is that the entire Arab League sort of disconnected him. He became a persona non grata. And then now there is a trend to bring everybody back. Everybody made peace with Erdogan. Everybody made peace with Qatar, that was completely ostracized. Everybody made peace with Assad. Everybody's coming back because Saudi Arabia is leading a kind of a let's make the region more stable for international investment and for economy. However, of course it would backfire, because what Assad has done and what the Iranians are doing is disintegrating countries from within. They've done that in Syria. Obviously, the plan is to do the same in Jordan, and now for the very first time in the recent months, there's been a public outcry by the king himself against these very attempts.
Yeah, very interesting. Ruth, thank you for now. Ruth Wiseman there. Well, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been visiting IDF troops in Gaza's southern city of Rafah today for the first time. It comes as Israeli teams negotiate in Cairo for a deal to free the hostages. It's hoped that the mounting military pressure on Hamas, including the suspected elimination of the senior commander Mohammed Deif, will make the group more open to an agreement. Our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osseran has this report.
As an Israeli delegation is in Cairo on Thursday for talks on a ceasefire and hostage release deal for Gaza, some of Israel's government members are trying to thwart an agreement that would see a pause in the fighting and the gradual release of 120 hostages still held in Gaza. One of them was Israel's far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who visited the Flashpoint Temple Mount compound in Jerusalem.
I came here to the most important place for the state of Israel, the people of Israel, to pray for the hostages. May they return home, without a reckless deal, without surrender. I am praying and also working hard for the Prime Minister to have courage not to concede and to go on until victory is achieved, to add military pressure, to stop the fuel, to win.
The political pressure comes as the Saudi newspaper Asharq reports that Israel hosted a secret meeting with American and Palestinian officials last week in an attempt to find, quote, interim solutions to the main issues that are currently blocking the further progress of the negotiations. One of the proposed solutions is for the Palestinian Authority to take over the management and control of the crossing in Rafah, where Prime Minister Netanyahu made a secret visit on Thursday. According to the report, Israel requested that the PA return to control the crossing in practice, but not officially. The Palestinians refused. Regarding the Philadelphia axis, that's the border between Gaza and Egypt, the Americans and Egyptians will reportedly monitor the border corridor as an alternative for the Israeli military presence.
Under pressure and force, suddenly Hamas is flexible. Now they say they will not agree that we stay in Philadelphia corridor and prevent the entry of weapons from Egypt. They will not agree that we prevent terrorists and weapons from entering the northern Gaza Strip. They will not agree that we maximize the number of those released. And I tell you, the more we persist with the pressure, the more they will give up.
Meanwhile, on the ground, IDF forces continue to target Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad infrastructure across the Gaza Strip. The IDF said it eliminated the commander of PIJ's naval forces in Gaza City, as well as dozens other Hamas operatives. And despite ongoing ceasefire talks, the fighting in the field continues.
Well, Ruth Wiseman is with me in the studio. So we saw the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, in Rafah for the first time. What is this image supposed to convey? Is this symbolic? Is this a sign that Hamas is weak enough to accept a deal? Or what do you read into it?
I'm not sure. I'm not an advocate for trying to explain what the political maneuvers are of the Prime Minister. What I can say is that Hamas is indeed weakened. The IDF has done significant moves forward and maneuvering forward in terms of its military achievements and in terms of putting the Hamas really on its tiptoes, because it closed the lifeline in terms of the crossing over to Egypt, blocked the tunnels that were illegally dug and moved from the Gazan side of Rafah to the Egyptian side of Rafah, and basically blocked any kind of aid to the Hamas operatives, while still giving aid with the international assistance to the people, even though Israeli soldiers are guarding with their bodies and with their weapons that very aid, so that it doesn't fall into the hands of Hamas, but rather go to the people themselves. But there is movement, and perhaps there was a wish to elevate or to leverage that movement and that achievement in terms of the Prime Minister. However, the very significant thing that is now on the table is that there are negotiations for some kind of a deal, and part and parcel of the deal is how that crossing will be managed. And Israel is adamant not to allow that kind of smuggling again, and therefore there's a lot of talk surrounding who would manage that crossing. So perhaps there was also a part of showing that he himself is going to check and see with his own eyes, because this is a significant lifeline for the Hamas.
Yeah, I mean, that would be key, wouldn't it? Because if Israel loses control of that crossing, Hamas will be able to rearm. We could find ourselves back in the same situation 2 years from now.
Of course. In fact, if Hamas stays and there's no re-education in the Gaza Strip, it will happen anyway. So there are a couple of things that need to be done in order to make a whole and comprehensive change in that place. And not only there, the West Bank and Jordan are exactly of the same potential. There's education and indoctrination for incitement, not only against Israel and the Jews, but the West, which is horrific and can only have disaster born out of it. And second of all, there's no stronghold on the terrorists in Jordan, yes, but in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, no stronghold on the terrorist groups.
But is there a contradiction in that, on one hand, you've got ministers in the government saying Hamas has been almost completely destroyed, 60% have been either killed or injured, according to the defence minister, and on the other hand, Israeli negotiators are having to go to Cairo to try and get some kind of deal from Hamas. I mean, is there a contradiction there or not?
Not quite. There are between 50 and 60% of the senior leadership of the Hamas has been eradicated, but that still leaves 40 to 50% more, including Sinwar himself, who is very adamant now that death is most probably on a very, very high scenario, has been eliminated, the third in command after Sinwar. That is a significant hit because he was the head of the military operations. But Sinwar is still there, there are still operatives, they are still working underground, and they still, the entire tunnel network to get rid of. Again, you leave a little bit, 2, 3, 4 years from now, they'll go back to doing what they did.
All right, Ruth, for now, thank you very much. Well, with just days to go before Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addresses the US Congress, Israel's parliament has passed a law opposing Palestinian statehood. France has already criticised the move. With more, here's our correspondent, Robert Swift.
Israel's parliament voted to affirm its rejection of Palestinian statehood. 68 out of the Knesset's 120 members approved the motion, including MKs from Benny Gantz's National Unity Party. It was submitted by the opposition New Hope Party, arguing that the Palestinian state would represent a threat to Israel and perpetuate the nearly century-old conflict.
We've come to this difficult situation partly due to our own fault. I'm talking about the Oslo Agreement, the concept known as the two-state solution, which we all know is not a solution. It's just another step toward the destruction of Israel.
9 representatives from Arab parties voted against the resolution.
At the end of the day, we think that there is no solution. But even today, if you oppose a Palestinian state, you know that there will come a day when a Palestinian state will exist next to Israel.
As is often the case in Israel's parliament, MKs at times became heated during the debates.
I call upon all the states that did not recognize two people of those fascist, crazy governments.
The scale of the vote shows broad consensus among Israeli political parties, putting them at odds with the support for a two-state solution favoured by most of Israel's Western allies.
Ruth Wiseman is with me in the studio. And Ruth, this is a vote that will put most of Israel's allies, on edge. They all insist that there must be a Palestinian state. Why do you think that this vote went through today?
I would very simply say, particularly to France, that has said very negative things about this particular vote. How would they like to have a state with Daesh right on its border and accept it because that's the way that they want to live? This is the reality, unfortunately, that we live with in this current state of affairs. If the Hamas is not eliminated and a new system of education is put into the Gaza Strip as well as the West Bank, we basically have an extremist Islamist ruled land, a piece of land, a territory that teaches kids and indoctrinates kids from the minute that they are born to kill, murder, rape, carnage, and massacre first Israelis and Jews, and then anybody who is not.
Does this vote mean to never agree to a Palestinian
Well, that's
state?
the thing. The vote, the purpose of the vote was to make it very difficult for a different political outlook to, let's say, create some kind of a solution like it happened in the 90s, where there was an example of systematic change and step by step towards a Palestinian state, starting with the West Bank and the Palestinian Authority, granting weapons to the Palestinian Authority, bringing them from Tunisia and other places to the West Bank, and basically creating this kind of what they feel is a war. That was the internal purpose. The external purpose is to understand that at the moment to create or to talk about a Palestinian state with weapons
in the wake
next
of a
to
terrorist
us
attack is
insane.
Ruth, for now, thank you. Now, tomorrow, the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, will publish an advisory opinion declaring Israel's control of the West Bank an illegal occupation. The court is considering the consequences of Israeli policies in the Palestinian territories. This is separate from South Africa's case against Israel at the ICJ, in which it accuses Israel of carrying out a genocide in Gaza. We're here to talk about all of that and more specifically about the presiding judge in the case. We're joined by Hillel Neuer. He's the executive director at Human Rights Watch. Great to see you.
UN Watch.
Hillel, I'm so sorry. UN Watch.
We're the good ones.
Yes, UN Watch. So first of all, talk me through what we're expecting to hear tomorrow from the ICJ.
Sure. Well, they've been asked to rule on Israel's settlement policies and occupation. So clearly they're going to say it's against international law. Israel should withdraw, which prejudges negotiations that are supposed to happen. The Security Council has called for negotiations since 1967. So this ruling, it's really just an advisory opinion. It's not binding, but it would, in effect, prejudge negotiations between the parties, which is the only way to move forward if we want to ever establish peace.
OK, now let's talk about the case that you've put together against the judge who's presiding in the far more important, I think, genocide case against Israel. This is Judge Nawaf Sawal. We can take a quick listen now to some of the comments he's made in the past about Israel. Take a listen.
Gaza can be described clearly and soundly as the largest prison in the world. Most of them, the majority of them, are the victims of the policy of displacement and expulsion, which coincided with the establishment of the State of Israel. Let's remember, Mr. President, that more than two-thirds of the population of the Gaza Strip, nearly 70% of the population of the Gaza Strip, are refugees who have no clear address in their own land except refugee camps.
Israel, as an occupying power, has constantly and systematically violated its basic duties under international humanitarian law. Such violations have included the annexation of land, the punitive demolition of houses, the transfer of population, collective punishments, political assassinations, and the use of torture.
All right, so Judge Nawaf Salam there, in his own words, some would argue that he is not neutral in this case.
Yes, look, many people knew from the start that he was the former ambassador of Lebanon and had seen various of his posts, some of his speeches. We knew that he wasn't neutral. But our report today went into the archives of the UN. We found that he voted against Israel 210 times, accused Israel of war crimes repeatedly. So 210 times over a 10-year period voted against Israel. Clearly, when it comes to Israel, he is the opposite of objective, the opposite of impartial, and the right and ethical thing to do would be for himself to recuse himself, to step down from any proceeding concerning Israel. But, you know, it's not just that he's anti-Israel, he's anti-human rights. Whenever a resolution came up for the victims of the Iranian regime, he voted with the Ayatollahs. He voted with the Assad regime. He was on the Security Council and voted to block a statement that would have held the Assad regime to account. He voted with the Lukashenko regime of Belarus against the victims, and he posted a tweet celebrating the icon of resistance, Fidel Castro. So this is someone who's anti-Israel, anti-human rights. He's the president of the International Court of Justice.
Right, he's not just one of the many judges.
Right, he's the president. And by the way, this has not been reported yet, so this is sort of a scoop here, which is that we're hearing from The Hague that he is abusing his position to expedite the proceedings against Israel. Anyone who's ever been to a court knows it takes a long time. But the genocide case by South Africa, a spurious, frivolous case, he's been expediting proceedings. Israel asked for a bit of time. They needed some time because of Shabbat and other things. He didn't care. The vice president of the court, very rare, condemned him in a very sharp dissenting opinion just a month or two ago for the way he was proceeding. The same thing with the advisory opinion. A professor who worked at the ICJ said he didn't expect it out for a very long time. So Nawaf Salam, who represented Lebanon, which is dominated by Hezbollah, anti-Israel, anti-human rights, abusing his position as the president of the ICJ to expedite biased proceedings against Israel.
So have you had any response at all from the court with regard to the...
No, the report's just come out now.
Okay.
We hope that the ICJ will answer, and the president. Members of Congress from both sides of the aisle in April called on him to step down or said that they would ask for U.S. sanctions. He hasn't stepped down. If he doesn't do the right thing, then we're going to support sanctions against this individual who's abusing his position.
And you mentioned the other judge who'd complained about him at the court. Do you think there might be other judges who share those views?
I don't know. We only know publicly that she made in a dissenting opinion the fact that he was being unfair in the way that he was expediting proceedings, didn't grant an Israeli request for a delay of a couple of days so they could find a lawyer on a particular proceeding. I don't know if there's other judges who feel the same way.
And when are we expecting the final decision in this case?
Well, the advisory opinion is due tomorrow, and then the South Africa case, that's something that will probably take a long time, but South Africa keeps bringing in new applications for new measures, so it's sort of an ongoing.
In the news,
yeah, that's right. That's
okay,
right.
All right. Well, we wish you all the best with that.
Thank you.
Lawyer. Thank you. Ruth, just a word from you. I mean, another example of lawfare, as it's been termed, against Israel.
It's really completely ridiculous. We just have to look at not the UN watch, but rather the Human Rights Watch.
Well, they were yesterday.
That came, yes, exactly, yesterday, and blamed Israel in a very astounding manner. I mean, the level of hypocrisy and the manner in which it's very obvious that a biased group of people are sitting and are looking just at one specific country, the Jewish country it happens to be, that will do no good in their eyes. In other words, there is no level that is enough. And by the way, Nawaf said, the president of the court, he said something very interesting, that there are refugees that have no position in their own country. Why don't they have a position in their own country? Since 2006, there's been a Palestinian government in that land.
All right, we're going to take a short break. Thank you both. Stay with us.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Welcome back. Now, Argentina's President Javier Milei will submit a bill to try in absentia the Iranian suspects behind the bombing of a Jewish community centre in Buenos Aires 30 years ago today. The attack on the Amir Centre killed 85 people and wounded more than 300. Earlier this year, Argentina's top court blamed Iran for the attack and said it was carried out by Hezbollah terrorists. And today, Milei participated in a ceremony to honour the victims. Let's listen to what he had to say.
We have proposed a break with what different governments have done concerning the Amir case in the last 30 years. We are promoting a law to extend the trial in absentia to severe crimes, among which is the financing of terrorism. It will make it possible to try the leaders of the Iranian regime involved in the bombing. While they may never be able to serve a sentence, they will not be able to escape the eternal condemnation of a free court proving their guilt to the entire world.
To talk more about that, we're joined now by Jason Brodsky, Policy Director at the group United Against a Nuclear Iran. Thank you very much for being with us, Jason. So the previous Argentine government was accused, wasn't it, of covering up Iran's role in the Amir bombings. Do you think we are on the verge of seeing some sort of justice for the victims 30 years on?
Well, it's great to be with you, Laura. I think the new government of Javier Milei has made great strides in this matter. He recently blacklisted Hamas as a terrorist organization. I would like to see the Argentinian government blacklist the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization, just as the United States has done. It's long overdue. Let's not forget that the IRGC played a role in greenlighting and planning that operation. There was a meeting in August 1993 in Mashhad that was presided over the supreme leader of the Islamic Republic and included Mohsen Rezai, who was commander-in-chief of the IRGC at the time. And I think it is warranted from Argentina's perspective.
We've just heard about an Iranian plot to kill former US President Donald Trump. We regularly hear about the attempted murder of Iranian dissidents in both the United States and Europe. What does this tell us, Jason, about how Iran has managed to spread its kind of nefarious activities around the world 30 years after the Amir bombings?
Well, Laura, this is deeply disturbing. I think that this threat stream is nothing new. It's been going on for years. But the problem has been that the United States has been playing defense where we need to be going on offense. The response from the United States and its allies in Europe to a whole host of these attacks has been a strongly worded press statement, warning of consequences, a few symbolic sanctions, and maybe an indictment here or there. But beyond that, there are no policy consequences beyond the law enforcement context to these plots. And that has to change in order to shift the calculus in Tehran. I would recall for your viewers in 1993, when there was an assassination attempt or plot that was thwarted at the last minute by the United States by Iraqi intelligence against then former President George H.W. Bush when he was visiting Kuwait in 1993, then President Clinton fired cruise missiles at Iraqi intelligence headquarters. And so I think that it is just basically a sad state of affairs where our deterrence has been wildly eroded with respect to the Iranian regime, and we're allowing them to undertake all these operations on U.S. soil, European soil, without any response, and that has to change.
Well, let's talk about the Iran's nuclear program, Jason, because we've got some reports that the Biden administration warned Iran privately over its nuclear program just last month. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think once again, this fits into what I was just saying. Our deterrence with respect to the Islamic Republic has been badly eroded. Private warnings are not going to deter Tehran. And I have questions about this report with it suggesting that U.S. officials were relieved or satisfied with the response that they received from the Islamic Republic. Given the history of Tehran's obfuscation over the nuclear file over decades, are we really going to take the Islamic Republic at its word? on these issues. So that is something that I had a question about in this report. And so private warnings are not deterrents. We have to start acting tangibly in order to deter Tehran from making these steps. And they're all occurring in the weapons group of the Organization for Defensive Innovation and Research, which Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, who was assassinated in November 2020, had previously presided over. And that has been a black box for a long time. And we need to start turning our attention more to that group.
And finally, we're getting a sense of deja vu, I feel, at the moment, Jason. We've got this new president in Iran, President Pezeshkian. He's been described as a moderate, much as President Hassan Rouhani was described as a moderate several years ago. And now the regime says it wants to get back in and pursue nuclear talks with the West. I mean, is this just history repeating itself?
It is history repeating itself. It's also an attempt by the supreme leader to put a smiling face in the presidency, saying all the right things in order to basically try to divide and conquer the Iranian opposition, and also to try to thwart pressure campaigns that may be undertaken by the United States and its allies on the world stage in advance of what Tehran thinks is a probable victory by Donald Trump in the presidential contest. It has been preparing and operating under that assumption for some time. An informal working group, according to the New York Times, in Iran's foreign ministry has been established to plan for that. So this is their operating assumption, and you can see why they're putting someone like Masoud Pezeshkian in this chair. It was not an organic democratic contest, and we need to stop behaving as if this is a Western democratic electoral result. It's not. This is an authoritarian regime, and they do authoritarian things as a result. So that is something I think that the world needs to understand, and this is just another show that the Islamic Republic has put on in the past, and we shouldn't be fooled by the the warm words and the mild rhetoric coming from Tehran. The brutality of the regime remains the same.
Jason, thank you very much. Jason Brodsky there at United Against a Nuclear Iran. Ruth Wiseman is with me in the studio, former member of the Knesset and research fellow at the Misgav Institute for National Security. And we are hearing this more moderate tone coming out of Tehran, just as we see its activities of exploding all across the region. Do you think that the Americans are falling for it again?
I cannot imagine that with the best intelligence in the entire universe, the United States of America does not have the information, all the information that they need to understand that this is absolute foolishness. I mean, there is nothing democratic about the Iranian elections. And of course, there's nothing reformist about a gynecologist who said that women do not need to be checked by doctors at one point. There is an actual quote of him saying that that's not a very reformist, moderate thing to say. No. But he is certainly a part and parcel of the Ayatollah regime. In fact, it's not Ayatollah, it's rather Mullah regime. Ayatollah is too high a religious word for the leaders, the extremist leaders of that country. And Iran, in fact, is a very big danger, not only to Israel, but to the entire world. The countries like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, and others well understand that. It's almost impossible to me to fathom that the United States doesn't, yet the way in which it acts vis-a-vis Iran, particularly in the last couple of years, is a little bit worrying.
Are you encouraged by what you heard at the Republican Party convention this week? Strong support for Israel, strong support for the hostages, a prayer for the hostages, but also a lot of talk about the Abraham Accords, which was interesting, and about that America needs to confront Iran more robustly.
I think that the world needs to confront Iran. I don't think it's a matter of Republican or Democratic or this political party, if it's right-wing or left-wing. I think it's a worldwide threat. And the Iranians, it is quite clear, it's very difficult to understand how one cannot understand this, because they say it clearly, the extremist Islamic rhetoric, not only thought and ideology, but rhetoric, whether it's from the Shiite side led by Iran or again from the Qatari and Turkish-led Sunni Muslim Brotherhood side, there is a threat to the world because the ideology calls for a worldwide caliphate of Sharia-led domination that doesn't leave you and myself, Christians, Republicans, Democrats, right-wing, left-wing, Netanyahu and his opposition at all in any place that could well live in some kind of an understanding with them. And that's what they're aiming for, including the West.
All right, Ruth, for now, thank you very much. Well, Turkey's President Erdogan said this week that he was planning to end military operations in northern Iraq. Ankara sent troops in 2022 in what Erdogan claimed was a crackdown on the Kurdish militant group, the PKK. But Iraq's First Lady, Shanaz Ibrahim Ahmed, has written a long post on social media accusing Turkish troops of committing crimes against Kurdish civilians. To talk about that, we're joined by Antifa Kar. He's the president and founder of the Kurdish Protection Action Committee and the former spokesman for the Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq. Thank you for being with us, Antifa. Great to see you. So what are Turkish troops doing in Iraqi Kurdistan? Are they targeting civilians? And what is the government in Erbil doing about it?
Great to see you, Laura. Unfortunately, the First Lady belongs to the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, the PUK, which are very unfortunate in alliance currently with the PKK. And the PKK is a terrorist organization. Like Turkey or hate it, the PKK is a terror organization threatening the stability of Iraq, Syria, and Turkey and the region. And they are also in alliance now, the PKK, with Hezbollah of Lebanon and with Iran. So what she's saying is basically not going to solve the problem, is even going to make it more complicated. I called on your program previously, and I repeat it today, there has to be an international alliance to counter the PKK, and not only the Turkish or the Kurdistan region job. The PKK are killing Kurds more than killing Turks or the Turkish army. And as I said, they has to be eliminated. And they are extension of the Hamas terror, of the Hezbollah terror, and which is all sponsored by Iran.
So would you like the Turkish troops to stay in Iraq?
The problem is the areas where the Turkish troops are entering Iraq are under no one's control. Neither the federal government in Baghdad is capable to control it because it's a very rugged mountainous area, nor the Kurdish government with their limited capabilities they're able to control it. These are very rugged mountains. That's why the PKK, the Qandil Mountains called, made it a stronghold for them to launch attacks against the Kurds in Iraq and against Turkey. But again, as I said, the PKK now, some of the PKK, believe it or not, are paid by the Iraqi proxy Shia militias. So that shows you where the alliance is. They are also controlling the area of Sinjar and creating mayhem for the Yazidis. So it's not only, this is not only a problem of Turkey, this is a problem beyond the capability of Iraq or the Kurdish government and requires coordination. But Iran is using the PKK as a stick against Turkey, against Iraq's stability, and against the region.
Meanwhile, talking about Iranian-linked militia, another one of those groups carried out a drone attack, quite a serious drone attack on the Al-Ain US military base in Iraq. This has been described as a huge embarrassment for Baghdad. What does this tell us about the activities of these militias after they had appeared to scale back their attacks somewhat?
I would add it would be a huge embarrassment for the Biden administration, which has been calling appeasing Iran, allowing today the Secretary Blinken allowed Iraq to pay for electricity for Iran. So the appeasement, the addiction to the appeasement policy of Iran, that's the result of it. The result of it, Hamas attacked Israel. The result of it, those militias got emboldened. Not to mention that the Iraqi government is paying those militias $3 billion on a declared line item on the Iraqi budget, and not this only for salaries. This is the first time you see it, a government who's supposedly an ally of the United States paying a terror groups, at least 4 of them within the Hashd al-Sha'bi, by the Iraqi budget. And the United States should take strong stand. We are hoping in November there will be a change of administration, change of policy, and the Iraqi government should be held accountable. Sheikh Akram al-Ka'bi, the head of al-Nujaba, yesterday, less than 24 hours ago, Laura, put out a video detonating with his own hands on the video a drone attack against Israel from Iraq. This is not acceptable. And the same guy carries government IDs funded by the government on the payroll of the Iraqi government. And this dual stand of trying to appease Iran, at the same time hoping that Iranians will behave better in Iraq and in the Middle East, by the Biden administration failed and failed miserably. As I say, always October 7 was the test. But unfortunately, the Biden administration, there's no leadership to stop this unfortunate failing policy.
Entifad, great to talk to you as always. Thank you very much. Entifad Kanbar there. Now, the United Arab Emirates is sending troops to take part in military drills in South Korea. Emirati troops will operate alongside American and Korean troops on the peninsula for the first time. We can get more on that now with our Dubai correspondent, Bastien Bourri. So, Bastien, why South Korea? Why is the UAE sending troops there?
Well, this is the proof that Abu Dhabi is investing a significant amount in training its military personnel, particularly through American and now Chinese and Korean-based programs ranging from professional military education to more tactical training in collaboration, once again with American and now East Asian facilities. So internally, the Emiratis have begun developing their own education capability through the establishment of a national defense college, for instance. And outside their borders, they are trying to gain experience in operating in various environments, like conducting drills with China, with Korea, as well as real operations involving air, but also ground and sea-based capabilities. Their military campaign in Yemen is a good example, all to the detriment, and of course that's the tragedy, all to the detriment of the Yemeni people, but in favor of greater operational experience for Abu Dhabi.
And the UAE, of course, has just nominated a new defence minister. Is this kind of him trying to make his mark on things?
In a way, yes. This new minister is in charge of asserting the country's defense strategy, which is based on a series of guiding principles. First, countering Iran. Iran represents the greatest security challenge to the UAE, which, with long-standing territorial dispute, doubts about the security of strategic shipping lanes in the Strait of Hormuz, concerns about Tehran's nuclear and ballistic programs, about Iranian proxies activities as well in neighboring countries like Iraq and Yemen. Then the second priority will be to counter extremism with groups like the Muslim Brotherhoods, Al-Qaeda, and also what's left of the Islamic State. And we saw that yesterday in Oman. All this being seen as threats to the UAE's strategy to preserve and grow its influence within the region. And then the third principle, which is probably the most important one, is to work toward limiting the UAE's dependence on foreign partners, despite Abu Dhabi's close relationship with countries like the United States and South Korea, especially militarily. So this new minister will be focusing on the local defense industry and the capacity of his own military personnel.
Bastien, thank you very much. Bastien Bourri there in Dubai. Now, Pakistan lodged an official complaint with the Taliban government in Afghanistan over an attack against one of its military compounds in the country's northwest. 8 soldiers were killed and many more injured. The UN and the United States have expressed concern of late about the rise of extremist and terrorist groups inside Afghanistan following the Taliban's takeover. We're joining us now. Ahmed Qureshi is a Pakistan-based journalist and TV host. Great to see you, Ahmed. Thank you for joining us. This is thought, isn't it, to be the work of the TTP, otherwise known as the Pakistani Taliban. Can you explain to us a bit about this group, which is believed to be responsible for hundreds of deaths in Pakistan?
Exactly, Laura. Good to see you. So basically, we have the Afghan Taliban. Everybody, the world knows the Afghan Taliban. It started back in the 1990s. The Pakistani Taliban is a fairly newer phenomenon. It began after 9/11 in Pakistan. So these are the Pakistani Taliban. So whereas you have the Afghan Taliban who are in power in Afghanistan, we have this Pakistani Taliban. Now, the Pakistani Taliban basically operated inside Pakistan for years, and they basically attacked Pakistani civilians and Pakistani military and government buildings. Now, after Pakistani anti-terror operations, they escaped into Afghanistan, and now they've pledged allegiance to the Afghan Taliban. And so to speak, they're under protection of the Afghan Taliban de facto government. Obviously, it's an interim government in Afghanistan. And Pakistan is basically asking the Afghan Taliban government, the de facto government, the interim government, to please stop these people or hand them over to Pakistan. Now, the Afghan Taliban says, we can't do this, number one. And number two, if you have a problem with them, they are your citizens, try to deal with them, politically, negotiate, talk. Pakistanis do not want to do that because they're terrorists and they're killing Pakistani soldiers and civilians, so they want to fight them. So it's a very difficult situation between these two countries. And now we've seen over the past couple of years, we've seen an increase in the number of attacks that emanate from inside Afghanistan. And now this attack that happened is a major attack because 10 attackers, all of them were killed eventually, but one of them, actually, Pakistani investigators say they were successful in identifying one of the attackers, and it appears he's based in Afghanistan, and he's an Afghan citizen, as a matter of fact. And so it's a very difficult situation. Now, Pakistan, of course, obviously cannot go beyond what it's doing. It's trying to convince the Afghan Taliban government. There have been some reprisals in terms of the treatment of indirect signaling to the Afghan government that we will not treat your citizens well in Pakistan if you do not take care of our concerns. So there's a lot of tension right now between Kabul and Islamabad. And frankly, there's not much that Pakistan can do right now because, frankly, this is an interim government in Afghanistan. Most of the world does not recognize it, but it's a de facto government. The UN and everybody's dealing with them because, at least they're taking care of security in Afghanistan, so it's not a headache for most of the neighbors of Afghanistan. But Pakistan obviously is not satisfied with that. The United States and other Western partners are supporting Pakistani position, obviously, and are trying to convince the Taliban to do something about the TTP. Let's see where this goes.
Well, the UN and the US, as I said, mentioned this week that they are concerned about the rise of not just Taliban-linked groups, but also ISIS, ISIS-K, Al-Qaeda, all of these terrorist groups. Would you say that Afghanistan is becoming a major terrorist hub again, just as it was back in the 1990s?
We are not yet there, Laura. We're not there yet. But, these are the early signs because, when back in the 1990s, this is how it began. But it was much faster and much lethal back in the 1990s. Right now, it's, yes, there is a concentration. TTP is violent or is conducting violent attacks across the border. Now, the rest of the terror groups are operating or are based inside Afghanistan. They have not yet carried out attacks across from Afghanistan. So, for example, the Afghan Taliban government in Kabul, you'll be surprised to hear this, has a very good relationship right now with China, has a very good relationship with Iran, and with a number of other Central Asian republics. The only country right now, it seems, and also with India, you'd be surprised, the Afghan Taliban have a very, very good relationship with India as well, although they do not share a border. But Pakistan is one country which, again, shares the largest border. These two countries share the largest border, also share a lot of ethnic intersections, but at the same time don't have a good relationship. And Pakistan is the only place where a group based in Afghanistan is conducting violent attacks. So we're not yet there, the situation back in the 1990s, but it's emerging and it's growing. And you can rest assured, if you have this UN report, you have the US expressing concern, you have Pakistan expressing concern, you can rest assured this spells trouble. This could, grow bigger into a huge and a bigger problem into the future. But we're not there yet.
Ahmed, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Ahmed Qureshi there. And Ruth Wiseman is with me in the studio. We are at a very dangerous moment globally, aren't we? We just heard Ahmed there describing how, terrorist Islamist groups are very much on the rise in Afghanistan, in that part of the world. Obviously, we've seen what's happening here. We've got a president of the United States who, people are saying is weak and doesn't have a grasp on what's going on at the moment. Just give us a sense of where you see this headed.
It almost sounds like a Hollywood script, but there is quite a systematic mechanism led by certain forces that are perhaps not politically correct, but they are the former USSR, currently led by Russia, China, Iran, and Islamic extremism on the other side, which is Muslim Brotherhood. All of these factors have only one thing in common. They want hegemony and power, which goes, of course, with riches and money, but they want and they thrive on chaos. And chaos means disintegrating countries from within and encouraging different groups from within, as was described in Iraq, which is a very good example, formerly by the Kurdish commentator, about what Iran and other groups, the former USSR, Russia has been doing this for years. China has been doing this in Africa, for example, in Latin America. We need to watch out and have some kind of a policing.
It's a global phenomenon. Ruth, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you very much.
Global phenomenon, exactly.
Stay tuned.
A new voice is about to be heard.
אתם צופים בערוץ החדשות I-24 News.
I-24 News launches its fourth channel in Hebrew, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
ותיעדו את הטבח.
I-24 News in Hebrew brings its international success for the past 10 years to Israel. Real-time news, sharp analyses, and passionate debates on the burning issues shaping Israeli society and the entire Middle East. And for you, English-speaking viewers, I-24 News offers a unique, immersive experience. Every day until 11 a.m. EST, Hebrew programs will be broadcast live with English subtitles. And from 11 a.m. EST, back to your favorite shows in English. More than ever, the heart of a new Middle East beats on I-24 News.
Netanyahu makes a surprise visit to Rafah as the debate in Israel intensifies over a hostage deal. We'll have the latest. The war in the north claims another IDF soldier as Israel takes out a top Hamas-linked terrorist in Lebanon. And as Donald Trump takes the stage at the Republican National Convention, we'll go live to our reporter there and look at how Trump might deal with Israel in a second term. Welcome to the Rundown on I-24 News. I'm Khaled Ben-David. Just days before his trip to Washington, D.C., Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made a dramatic and highly meaningful visit to Rafah today, where IDF troops are fighting to take full control of the last Hamas stronghold in southern Gaza. This as Israeli negotiators in Cairo are trying to finalize a deal with Hamas that would see the release of more of the 120 Israeli hostages still being held in Gaza. Now, one of the sticking points in those talks is said to be whether Israeli forces remain in control of the Rafah crossing on Gaza's border with Egypt. Our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran has more on the military battles inside Gaza and the public disputes within Israel over a hostage deal and the connection between them.
As an Israeli delegation is in Cairo on Thursday for talks on a ceasefire and hostage release deal for Gaza, some of Israel's government members are trying to thwart an agreement that would see a pause in the fighting and the gradual release of 120 hostages still held in Gaza. One of them was Israel's far-right National Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who visited the Flashpoint Temple Mount compound in Jerusalem.
I came here to the most important place for the state of Israel, the people of Israel, to pray for the hostages. May they return home, without a reckless deal, without surrender. I am praying and also working hard for the Prime Minister to have courage not to concede and to go on until victory is achieved, to add military pressure, to stop the fuel, to win.
The political pressure comes as the Saudi newspaper Asharq reports that Israel hosted a secret meeting with American and Palestinian officials last week in an attempt to find, quote, interim solutions to the main issues that are currently blocking the further progress of the negotiations. One of the proposed solutions is for the Palestinian Authority to take over the management and control of the crossing in Rafah, where Prime Minister Netanyahu made a secret visit on Thursday. According to the report, Israel requested that the PA return to control the crossing in practice, but not officially. The Palestinians refused. Regarding the Philadelphia axis, that's the border between Gaza and Egypt, the Americans and Egyptians will reportedly monitor the border corridor as an alternative for the Israeli military presence.
Our control of the Philadelphia corridor and the Rafah crossing are essential for moving forward. At the same time, the military pressure we are exerting right here at Hamas's throat, along with standing firm on our just demands, helps us promote the hostage deal, including our demand to release a maximum number of hostages already in the first stage of the deal.
Meanwhile, on the ground, IDF forces continue to target Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad infrastructure across the Gaza Strip. The IDF said it eliminated the commander of PIJ's naval forces in Gaza City as well as dozens other Hamas operatives. And despite ongoing ceasefire talks, the fighting in the field continues.
And with us in the studio for more is our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osran. We're also joined by Reserves IDF Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus. He's the former international spokesperson for the IDF, now a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. And Jonathan, as I said, no coincidence that Prime Minister Netanyahu chose to go to Rafah, speak about the Rafah crossing, because he is under some pressure by some who say that if Israel needs to give up the Rafah crossing in order to secure a hostage deal, that's a price it should be paid. Clearly, he thinks differently, and you hear different voices about that. Let me get your view on the necessity for the IDF to actually physically control the Rafah crossing.
What I understand, based on the reality on the ground, based on what allowed Hamas to build the military mechanism that they were able to build under various Israeli governments for about 15, 20 years, the way that they did that was by smuggling weapons above and below ground in Rafah. So if Israel wants to prevent that from happening again, then Israel probably needs to control above and below ground. If it doesn't, then Hamas, if it remains with some nucleus of military capabilities after the fighting ends, Hamas will probably rearm itself through the very same tunnels that may have been destroyed now, that Hamas may try to rebuild in the future. But if Israel doesn't control the area with boots on the ground, I think that it's pretty safe to bet that Hamas will return there and use it in order to rebuild themselves. It may take a year or 2 or 3, but I think that they'll rebuild their capabilities if they are allowed to.
Right. Ariel, I suspect that's going to be one of the issues that the Prime Minister discusses in the White House with if he does meet with President Biden, who's currently under COVID restrictions, but certainly with other security officials there. Another key issue of the Biden administration is humanitarian aid in Gaza. Some debate in Israel today, apparently, between the Prime Minister, Defense Minister of Gallant, whether it be a hospital built for Palestinian children to treat them from Gaza. Some disagreements, but also this dismantling of this pier in Gaza that the U.S. built at great expense to bring aid into Gaza, and now that pier is no more. It has been dismantled and is being taken. I mean, what lessons could we say have been learned about these experiences?
So just quickly before the pier in the hospital, I just want to note that IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi said that Israel can give up the control over the Philadelphia corridor, and it will still be able to maintain Israel's security interests. This is the head of the military saying this just 2 days ago.
I will just say this shows you how even the growing debates between the security establishment and some may say Prime Minister Netanyahu on that issue, and yes, also on the humanitarian aid.
Virtually on everything. I mean, every topic that there is to discuss and debate publicly about, it seems as if Israeli defense establishment and the political echelon are debating it, which is fine. They're just debating it out in the open for everybody to see, for the Americans to see, for our enemies to see, for the Israeli public to see. The hospital being one example of something that I think Israel should have done 8 months ago, not today, but 8 months ago, for civilians and for children, whatever. It's being done now, but then the Prime Minister says, no, it's not going to happen, and the Minister of Defense tries to promote it. A classic example of how this war is being managed by Israeli leaders, and I wouldn't give it too high of an assessment of that leadership and management.
Well, and you've been close to that. But let's get back to that issue.
So let's start with the hospital.
And the hospital, and of course also with the pier.
Right. So this hospital basically is a decision that Gallant brought forward following a decision by the Israeli cabinet to allow the exit of Palestinians to get medical treatment from a third country. These are Palestinians, mainly children with chronic illnesses such as cancer and other severe conditions. So they were supposed to be able to, according to Israel, to leave for a third country for medical treatment. But in the absence of that plan, which was supposed to come from Israel's National Security Council, Gallant, in the absence of a plan that was agreed upon, came up with this plan for a field hospital that would be built for children from Gaza near the Rafah crossing. Now, this, as you both already discussed, pretty much ignited another public spat between Defense Minister Gant and Prime Minister Netanyahu, with officials from the Defense Ministry accusing the Prime Minister of playing politics with lives at stake. Netanyahu's office said that this is not going to happen, this hospital. And again, this hospital, it's important to stress, is a interim solution in the absence of a wider project that was supposed to enable Palestinians to receive treatment abroad. That's one issue, the hospital. The other issue, the floating pier. Let's first take a listen to the Deputy Commander of U.S. Central Command, Vice Admiral Bradley Cooper, describing how the pier had achieved its intended effect under what he called an unprecedented operation. Let's take a listen and we'll continue further.
Israel has been fully supportive of this effort. In the last several weeks, we've successfully delivered more than 1 million pounds of aid into Gaza via this route. Given the high sea state in the Eastern Mediterranean and the successful completion of the temporary military-enabled maritime surge mission, it's now time to announce the transition of this this new Cyprus to Ashdod to Gaza pathway.
So this Ashdod pathway, basically, this is a substitution for the American floating pier, which was a colossal failure.
Yeah, I think
they just threw money that drowned into water. But anyway, Israel will replace the pier with another pier that will be built off the port of Ashdod. And so from Cyprus, aid will go there, and from Ashdod, it will go to Gaza. This is going to be called Pier 28. And this is Israel's answer in an attempt to try and increase humanitarian aid going into Gaza, as it also is in negotiations to try and reach a deal, but also in talks for the day after, but also with the international courts breathing at the back of Israel, ramping up humanitarian aid initiatives, obviously doesn't hurt.
And Jonathan, you dealt with the humanitarian aid issue intensely as the IDF spokesperson.
So, I mean, I think what we're looking at is the battle for governing Gaza and controlling Gaza. Hamas understands fully that distributing aid and food and controlling it is the only real power remaining in Gaza. If they can continue to do it, they have force over the population and they remain relevant as a governing party. And if they relinquish that capacity, then their ability to control the population is greatly diminished. And what we see now is Israel keep pouring aid in, but the finishing leg of distribution is still not a system that is intact and working, and still doesn't serve Israeli purposes. And sadly for Palestinian civilians, it doesn't really serve the purposes of Palestinians either, because a lot of food is still stuck in UN or other warehouses instead of being distributed, and on the way, a lot of mismanagement by Hamas, etc. I think that this is, together with the issue of Rafah and the so-called Netzarim corridor that divides Gaza into two parts, the issue of how Israel will build a mechanism that will supplant or make Hamas and UNRWA take them out of business. That will be the real challenge for the day after, because only through doing that will Israel have the ability to actually start replacing Hamas.
Right, and to get back to your point about the discord between the defense establishment in Israel and the rest of the political echelon, we should add to that the announcement today from the Defense Ministry, from Yoav Gallant, that starting Sunday, draft notices will be sent to about 1,000 ultra-Orthodox or Haredi young men, a political issue, a process that Prime Minister Netanyahu has tried to delay because of the threat that it poses to his coalition.
Yeah, and even those 1,000 is far fewer than what the Supreme Court actually ordered the entire defense establishment to do. We're talking about less than 10% of those that are eligible for service. And what we're seeing the military do is kind of whitewashing or watering down the Supreme Court's decision. And instead of many tens of thousands, we're talking about only 1,000, allegedly between 18 and 28 years old. But I've heard more than one report that we're talking about those that are 23, already married, unmarried, not studying in the yeshivot anymore, but actually out in the work market, either working officially or unofficially. So really the devil here is in the details of which Haredim will actually be drafted. And you know, summons going out for Haredi men is not new. They've been ignoring them for many, many years. I don't know if they will respond to them now. And if 1,000 are summoned, maybe a few hundred will actually respond to
And
it.
I think the main response will be some of those, more of those demonstrations that we were just showing.
That's likely.
On the screen. All right, gentlemen, let's move on, because even as Israeli negotiators hold those talks in Cairo towards a hostage deal, the IDF continues to target top Hamas officials, and not just in Gaza, or at least the Gaza that is more familiar to us. Earlier today, an Israeli airstrike in East Lebanon's Bekaa Valley took out Mohammed Hamed Jabbar, a senior commander in a Hamas-affiliated terror force there known as the Farj Forces, in a village named Gaza, apparently. The IDF said Jabbar's elimination diminishes the capabilities of Hamas to plan and carry out attacks against Israel in the area of the northern border. Now, the operation comes just a day after Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah threatened to widen the scope of the Iran-backed terror group's attacks in northern Israel. Also today, another Israeli fatality in the war in the north. Reserve Sergeant First Class Ephraim Ben Amram, who was wounded June 30th in a rocket attack on an IDF base in the Golan Heights, died of his wounds. May his memory be a blessing. For more, let's go to our correspondent in northern Israel near the Lebanon border, Zach Anders. Zach, we're certainly used to hearing of some strikes taking out Hezbollah officials in Lebanon. Here we're talking about actually someone linked toward Hamas.
Yeah, there's been a lot of movement here today, Kalev. We've just come down from Shlomi with our protective gear on. We've now come to Nahariya, where it's quite busy. This is outside that zone where Hezbollah has been firing, and so you'll see a lot of traffic. The shops are still open here. You go about a mile, 2 miles north of here, and it's like a ghost town. That's where we enter into this supposed Hezbollah firing range. It has been a very busy day. 8 attacks at this point in the night that Hezbollah has claimed responsibility for. The alarms have been churning out almost every hour. The footage that we're seeing from what appears to be an earlier attempted interception is quite remarkable as well. We're still working to accurately locate where exactly this took place. Some of the video that we're getting in off social media doesn't share exactly where it is, but just knowing the area, it does appear to be in the Galilee Valley. What we're seeing today has been primarily what appears to be hostile aircraft alerts, and that has been what has been following on some of the word that I'm getting, that it's mostly been drones that have been launched today. And this is coming after what you just mentioned, this strike on both a Hezbollah and Hamas target in southern Lebanon. Neither of the two terror groups have acknowledged that this strike has taken place. And of course, as you mentioned as well, an additional soldier fatality here, which coming after that massive drone incident back on June 30th that wounded 19 soldiers at the time in a base in the Golan. We were discussing at length when that happened about the drone's ability to reach and penetrate Israeli air defense systems for quite a distance from southern Lebanon. My questions into the IDF at that time, as I went back and looked at my notes, was the drone originating from Syria? The IDF at the time said no, that drone did in fact come from southern Lebanon. And now we know, at the time it was not a fatal incident, but now we know it has been a soldier who was wounded more than a month, we're told, in the hospital, has died from those wounds. By my unofficial count, this is bringing the total number of IDF soldiers who have been killed here in the north since October 7th to 18, as well as 12 civilians.
Right. A heavy toll and there in the north, and it does continue today, as you said. Zach Anders there in northern Israel. Thank you for that. And Jonathan, as I mentioned, this strike comes a day after those threats by Hassan Nasrallah to widen the scope of the attacks. But it seems, and you can see from that footage there, that at least for today, as busy as it was, Hezbollah is still keeping within their so-called strike zone. But the question is, if strikes like these, and by the way, this was in deep well into Lebanon and Bekaa Valley, not in southern Lebanon.
No.
So the question is whether that might generate a deeper response from Hezbollah.
I think it's likely, but we have to remember who the target was. He wasn't Hezbollah. He was a Palestinian affiliated more with Hamas, and that takes the edge off it in terms of Hezbollah. But it definitely is indicative of Israeli capabilities, doing a targeted assassination so far from Israel, so accurately, with 0 civilian casualties around it. That's a very good sign towards Hamas, towards other Palestinian terrorist organizations, and against Hezbollah. I think it's likely that we will see a response, and I think that UAVs, the drones, they remain the biggest and most challenging threat that Israel faces. This is a global phenomena. The Americans, Ukrainian military and others struggle with small, fast-moving and lethal objects like the UAVs, and Israel still hasn't found a good solution for it. Lebanon, they're moving out of the Ashura holidays, which I think likely we will see a spike in activity, more rockets and more drones being fired. They were on less activity during the Ashura. Israel continued to target Hezbollah commanders and to strike inside Lebanon, which I think is the correct thing to do while you're at war. But to summarize this, we're looking at a situation where the balance is maintained and where Hezbollah continues to have Israel in a very comfortable situation where it suits their strategy, it harms Israel, and the balance between the two organization and Israel is that Hezbollah doesn't really have an incentive not to escalate and not to de-escalate.
Right, but of course, unforeseen circumstances can lead to an escalation in this kind of situation.
Definitely.
Sure. Now, as we mentioned earlier, Prime Minister Netanyahu is heading to Washington, D.C. next week to address a joint session of Congress, and he may or may not meet with President Biden there. Ahead of that visit, the Knesset today voted to reject the idea of a Palestinian state, a goal which is still being pursued by the White House. The motion was actually proposed by one of the opposition parties, but of course found support within the ranks of the coalition. Robert Swift has more on the politics behind the vote and its symbolic meaning.
Israel's parliament voted to affirm its rejection of Palestinian statehood. 68 out of the Knesset's 120 members approved the motion, including MKs from Benny Gantz's National Unity Party. It was submitted by the opposition New Hope Party, arguing that a Palestinian state would represent a threat to Israel and perpetuate the nearly century-old conflict.
We've come to this difficult situation partly due to our own fault. I'm talking about the Oslo Agreement, the concept known as the two-state solution, which we all know is not a solution. It's just another step toward the destruction of Israel.
9 representatives from Arab parties voted against the resolution.
At the end of the day, we think that there is no solution. But even today, if you oppose a Palestinian state, you know that there will come a day when a Palestinian state will exist next to Israel.
As is often the case in Israel's parliament, MKs at times became heated during the debates.
I call upon all the states that did not recognize two people of those fascist, crazy governments.
The scale of the vote shows broad consensus among Israeli political parties, putting them at odds with the support for a two-state solution favored by most of Israel's Western allies.
Ariel, perhaps belaboring the obvious for this Knesset to vote against the Palestinian state. Clearly, that's the case. Obviously, this is ahead of Prime Minister Netanyahu's visit there to take a stance. But the reality on the ground is that Israel still has to deal with the Palestinian Authority and its desire for and the international desire for a so-called political horizon. And the Palestinians are still the game in town, and from everything from moving forward in Gaza to Israel's relations internationally.
Look, 149 countries, members of the United Nations, have recognized the Palestinian state. Israel is not going to become the 150th
I
in the
would
near
say that's a safe
future. But if we're looking at the responses and what this is prompting from not only the PA, but the PA's political rivals, not only political rivals, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, their leaders met today, where in Doha, what's becoming the new terror hub in the Middle East. They met there and issued a joint call to Palestinian President Abbas and the PLO to withdraw its recognition of the State of Israel in response to this vote.
Something which Abbas has periodically threatened to do for years already.
And his deputy, Hussein al-Sheikh, the general director of the PLO's executive committee, he condemned this meeting, but he was also in attendance in that secret meeting between American, Israeli, and Palestinian officials in Israel last week regarding the day after. So that's important to note. In the joint statement between Hamas and PIJ, Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, Ziad al-Nahara, the leader of PIJ, they said that they discussed the overall political developments and developments on the field. It was interesting that they didn't really emphasize the cooperation on the field between Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, because the IDF isn't fighting only against Hamas, but obviously they don't need this vote in the Knesset to tighten the ranks, or at least to show that the ranks are being tightened. Obviously we have condemnations from all sides, but this highlighting the lack of unity among Palestinians as well.
Jonathan, the Knesset voting against the creation of a Palestinian state ahead of Benjamin Netanyahu's visit to Washington kind of reminds me of when senior Likud figures tried to pass a motion in that party trying to get Yitzhak Shamir to pledge not to recognize a Palestinian. Yitzhak Shamir, maybe the most hardline member of the Likud at the time. Let's say Prime Minister Netanyahu is not going to move towards a Palestinian state. But the question is, again, putting this out publicly ahead of the visit to the U.S. and in this sensitive time for Israel's international standing.
Yeah, and I was surprised by the numbers. Like, did we say only 68?
Yes, but some of them members of the opposition.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I think many of the opposition parties, the more Zionist of them, I think they would, in this current environment, say that. But I was surprised that it's only 68. And in terms of the strength of a message for Prime Minister going to Washington, I'm not sure that that's strong enough of a majority. If you remember, in the beginning of the war, there was a similar vote in Knesset. It was a different topic, but I remember something close to 90 Knesset members who voted very clearly. That isn't the case now. But appearances are important, and maybe this is something that the Prime Minister wanted to have before coming to Washington, and whatever he will be facing.
So again, it was an opposition party that actually brought the motion, or Gideon Saar's party, and maybe the Prime Minister didn't want to see the result you just mentioned in the Knesset. Jonathan Conricus, thank you for joining us. Ariel Wasman, stay with us. We are going out for a brief break, but coming up, we're going to our correspondent at the Republican National Convention in Wisconsin. So stay with us.
I had the mahala, I did an operation, and I had 34 treatments of radiation. After the treatments, I was halash, very, very tired. I couldn't even drive a car. A friend of mine says, Moshe, please, try the Z Medicare machine. I'm going to bring it to you. I said, I don't need it. I don't need it. After 3 days, I started driving. And I felt better. Since then, I'm always using the machine Z Medicare.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
I-24 News. Let's move now to U.S. politics. The Republican National Convention in Milwaukee, Wisconsin moves to its climax today with the official nomination of Donald Trump as the party's presidential candidate and his acceptance speech this evening. Now, whether Trump mentions or not the U.S. alliance with Israel, that issue has certainly been given prominence on the convention stage by several speakers, including an appearance there last night by Ronen and Orna Nutra, whose son Omer, an Israeli-American citizen, is being held hostage in Gaza. Here's some of what they had to say there.
President Trump called us personally right after the attack when Omer was taken captive. We know he stands with the American hostages. We need our beautiful son back. And we need your support. We need your support to end this crisis and bring all the hostages back home.
And for more, let's go to our correspondent there, our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim in Milwaukee at the Convention Center. Mike, we are a hostage family. We've seen representatives of Jewish organizations. We've seen even Jewish influences speaking out in support of Israel, also on anti-Semitism. Why have these issues now become so important to the Republican Party, and including in its platform?
I asked that same question to various officials here in Milwaukee. You got to look at last night's segment. We heard from the Nutra family there, but that whole segment began with the University of North Carolina fraternity brothers who saved an American flag from destruction during a pro-Hamas protest there on that campus. That was followed by Shabbos Kestenbaum, the Harvard University graduate who's suing the university for discrimination against Jewish students post-October 7th. Then the Nutra family, and then right after that was a Jewish leading politician Lee Zeldin. This was all in a row last night. That's not by accident. That's by design. I asked New York area Congressman Anthony D'Esposito, who was one of those who carried that wave in the New York area that led to Republican control of the House, whether that's a cognizant decision by the Republican Party to have that type of system set up of Jewish, of Israeli support set up within the party platform here at the RNC specifically to get that out to a national audience. Here was his response to that question.
I don't think it's just about a winning issue. It's about being on the right side of the issues. And the facts are that if Republicans didn't have a majority in the House of Representatives, we wouldn't have exposed everything that has come to light. We wouldn't have had the opportunity on our committees to expose the fact that educational institutions around this world have become petri dishes of hate. And that's why it's so important for us to deliver that message.
Now, of course, while Republicans say Democrats need to clean up their own party in terms of anti-Semitism, Republicans can't get off scot-free as well. They still have their anti-Semites, their Holocaust deniers, who are often given a prominent platform within the party, or at least on the fringes of the party. I spoke with one of two Jewish House Republicans, David Kustoff out of Tennessee, who works specifically on Holocaust-related issues, and asked him, hey, you're talking about the Democrats here. Well, what do the Republicans still need to do to clean up their act in terms of anti-Semitism within the party? Here's Representative Kustoff.
You know, there's been anti-Semitism that's existed forever, going back to the beginning of the Jewish people. I hear more of that out of the other side, and I'm not casting a blanket over everybody, because we've got a number of Democrats who are strongly supportive of Israel and strongly supportive of the Jewish people in this country and around the world. But I think you've seen that play out in some of the Democrat primaries, like the one they just had in New York State and the one that they've got in Missouri. But the message is, number one, we can never forget, and we've always got to fight against anti-Semitism across the nation and across the world. We've seen that on the college campuses.
Of course, we'd be remiss, Kalev, if we weren't looking ahead a little bit here to next week, where there's a big Jewish and Israeli issue here in the States. That, of course, the visit of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to Washington, D.C. for his joint session address to Congress, and potentially a White House meeting with Joe Biden, which may or may not be put on hold due to Biden's COVID situation right now. But I asked both Kustoff and the head of the Republican Jewish Coalition what they would like to see in terms of tone and content from Netanyahu, and what will be, a delicate balancing act here for the Israeli Prime Minister in addressing this divided Congress and addressing the tensions he's had as well with the current U.S. president. Here are those answers.
I had the opportunity to meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu 2 weeks ago today. I was in Israel speaking to the Knesset and met with Prime Minister Netanyahu. I think he's going to say a number of things. One is that Israel recognizes that the United States is Israel's greatest ally. And he knows how the majority of the American people feel about Israel and also feel about the Jewish people. I think he's going to continue to make the case that Israel and the United States must defeat terrorism down to its roots.
To the extent that he can help shift public opinion back to the horrors, why this is not a war that Israel wanted. This is not a war that Israel started. This is a war that came about as a horrific attack in which over 1,200 people were viciously murdered by Hamas. And I think, as we just said a second ago, the farther we get away from October 7th, it looks more and more like Israel not being the victim, but now rather being the aggressor. So I hope that in his speech, he's able to tug at the heartstrings of the American people. He's able to communicate that the fight that Israel is fighting against Hamas is the same fight that affects America and the West. This is not an Israel-only issue. This is an issue of the Iranian regime wreaking havoc in the region, trying to undermine our allies and ultimately be a stepping stone into attacking and weakening America. Israel's fight is America's fight. America's fight is Israel's fight. So I hope will be the takeaway.
Mike, obviously Republicans, Jewish Republicans, evangelicals who see support for Israel as an essential part of their Republican and conservative identity. But last night, J.D. Vance, the Senator Vance, the vice presidential nominee, focused entirely on domestic issues. And he represents the more isolationist wing, some would say, of the party. It'll be interesting to see if Donald Trump even brings up Israel and the Middle East in his remarks.
Trump has actually, we understand, rewritten his speech and wrote it himself, apparently, according to the Associated Press, to try to shift the narrative, to try to shift the tone, to unify the country in some ways, rather than the Donald Trump we've come to know and sometimes love and sometimes not. I'm sure he'll tout his own accomplishments. That's Donald Trump. That's just the way he is. Whether the Abraham Accords is relevant to this particular speech and whether he believes it's a winning message and worthy of the time he has on stage tonight, we're not quite sure yet. But I'm not quite positive how much that will play into the larger narrative. But again, this is a Donald Trump that loves to tout his accomplishments. Israel and the Abraham Accords certainly on that list. Wouldn't be a surprise, Colin.
Sure. Very good point, Mike. Mike Wagenheim there at the RNC in Milwaukee. Thank you for that. And with Donald Trump leading in the polls and President Biden's re-election chances looking, let's say, very shaky now, there is growing speculation over just how Trump would handle the issue of Israel in a second term. Our correspondent Owen Alterman went to the U.S. to speak with former officials in the first Trump administration, or the Trump administration, to get a sense of how they view that question and also whether they themselves would be willing to return to a Trump White House.
They said, take a look at what happened.
The event that shook the U.S. election campaign. Donald Trump, victim and political genius. In any event, Trump is leading in the polls. And in 110 days, he may walk onto the stage to give his victory speech. If so, Trump will return to the Oval Office where he made dramatic decisions that affect the lives of Israelis here in the Holy Land. If he wins, how will Trump treat Israel and the issues so close to Israelis' hearts? Will his policies on Israel continue? I-24 News went to meet those who worked with Trump within his administration to ask them what the future would look like with Trump as the 47th president of the United States.
He doesn't understand how alliances work. He doesn't have a philosophy. He doesn't think in policy terms. He thinks in ad hoc, transactional terms. Seen through the prism, how does this benefit Donald Trump?
John Bolton's opinions don't come as a surprise.
To have that discussion with the president, and as I said, he was willing to provide it. It wasn't that we solved any of the issues.
His tone, on the other hand, is another story. The lion of the American right, the pro-Israel hawk. Bolton supported the Iraq War early in the century and fought against the nuclear deal with Iran as the years went by. Along the way, he took hawkish positions in every corner of the world. Under Trump, Bolton served as national security advisor for a year and a half, one of the most senior positions in the administration and one of the closest to the president within the hive. In the end, he was less than impressed with Trump.
I don't think he's fit to be president. I don't think he understands enough, certainly in the national security space, about what America's national interests are.
For Kenneth Marcus, the issue of Israel is also close to his heart.
In the United States, as in Israel, we might have different opinions. We are all one people.
In his role in the Department of Education under Trump, Marcus focused on anti-Israel protests on American college campuses years before they broke into the headlines.
To see what happened on October 7 was absolutely one of the most horrifying days of my life. But then to see how so many Americans, especially on college campuses, have responded to the atrocities, to the anti-Israel genocides, this has been absolutely worse.
His approach was and still is controversial, initiating lawsuits and counter-investigations against universities based on the situation on their campuses. If Trump calls on him again during a second term, Marcus could be interested.
I would say that there was probably a greater tolerance for boldness in policymaking during the Trump administration than in prior administrations, and that this came from the White House and had a lot to do with who the president was.
He's very smart, he's very direct, he's very frank. He listens to a lot of people, which is a good thing, right? People always criticize he listens to too many people. There's a lot of people with good ideas, and he synthesizes the information and makes the decision. He's not afraid to wear his heart on his sleeve. He's not afraid to say things that make people uncomfortable.
Jason Greenblatt may be a known quantity. During the Trump administration, he was given the Israeli-Palestinian dossier and was involved in brokering the Abraham Accords. Greenblatt came to the White House after having known Trump for 23 years as his lawyer. And Greenblatt is ready to back Trump up to a certain point.
He's the same guy that I always knew in every interaction that I had with him, and he's a guy that I respect, even if he speaks differently than I would want to speak or that I'd want to teach my kids to speak.
When Donald Trump rode the escalator down to the political playing field in 2015, he broke the rules within the Republican Party that had created a consensus more or less centered around a conservative agenda and, to some extent, a conservative temperament. 9 years later, the Republican elite has gotten accustomed to Trump. But tensions within the party remain. There's the question of Trump's temperament, along with the question of his loyalty to the conservative agenda. And does the ambition to represent the forgotten working class justify the changes Trump made in the party?
There is a part of the Israeli public that identifies emotionally with the MAGA movement and in the way that movement looks at the elite. What do you say to those voters?
Well, I'd say this. My father was a firefighter for the city of Baltimore. My mother was the housewife. I'm the first person in my family to go to college. So I understand what blue-collar life in America is all about. And I'm telling you, Donald Trump is a threat to that way of life, not a supporter of it.
The average Israeli isn't interested in the infighting in the Republican Party between supporters of the free market and supporters of the working class. To the average Israeli, the story of Donald Trump is clear. Trump is good for the Jews. Will Trump's courage lead to brave decisions for Israel? Or will Trump's political instability lead to an abyss?
It seems to me that if you're evaluating the campaign of someone who has already served as president, you have to look at their record. President Trump recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, established a U.S. embassy in Jerusalem, established the Abrahamic Accords, made great strides with respect to the Golan Heights and elsewhere. I don't think we've had any U.S. president who has been as good as President Donald Trump.
Only experience will prove this out one way or the other. I'll just say I was with him for 17 months and came away with the firm conclusion that he had no North Star other than what benefits Donald Trump.
So how could it be that a president with that record, many Israelis will say, is someone that they shouldn't want back in the White House, just down the road from where we're sitting?
Every one of those decisions can be justified for the political benefit that came to Donald Trump.
This is where the personal story of Trump, the fight within his political party, and the Israeli story meet face to face.
Sometimes he absorbed information from people that we thought were harmful. For example, President Abbas, who made it seem like, this is before he cut us off, before the Jerusalem recognition by President Trump, President Abbas made it seem like, oh, it's all Israel's fault and we're ready to sign and we could do a really great deal. And President Abbas, despite what people think, carries himself as a statesman. So when he's sitting with President Trump and telling his story, he's a very good salesman, President Abbas. So it was also our job to explain the broader situation with the Palestinians.
He told me the story of when he met with Mahmoud Abbas. He came away convinced that Abbas really did want peace and that Bibi Netanyahu didn't.
That Bibi Netanyahu didn't want peace?
Not as much as Abbas. So that, you know, if it turns out that Trump is reelected, I'm not sure people in Israel should count on him being as favorable toward Israel as he was in the first term.
Bolton also revealed how Trump almost met with Mohammad Javad Zarif, Iran's then foreign minister.
And it's regrettable.
Late August of 2019, we attended the G7 summit in Biarritz, France. Trump called me up to his hotel suite, and along with Mick Mulvaney, then the chief of staff, and Jared Kushner, he said Macron had said he had Javad Zarif in a villa somewhere in Biarritz, and that he had invited Trump to meet with him.
What are you feeling and thinking at that moment?
That what I turned out to be the case, that I was on the verge of resigning. But Trump said, so what should we do? And I made the argument he should not meet with Javad Zarif for a lot of very good reasons. Mulvaney, to his credit, agreed, and Jared Kushner said, no, you should meet with him. Now, at the same time, Bibi Netanyahu was trying to get in touch with Trump, and Jared was intercepting the call.
Jared was stopping Netanyahu
That's correct.
contacting Trump to tell Trump not to meet with the foreign minister of Iran.
That's correct. And Jared said, no, you should meet with him. Maybe you can make a deal.
Above all, on a personal level, to right-wingers, it's the classic dilemma. To influence from the inside or from the outside? To go into public service to put the stamp on the decisions themselves?
In the event that I were given an opportunity to have greater impact by serving in a presidential administration, well, I tend to say yes to public service opportunities, provided that they are ones in which I think that I can make a difference for the United States.
At some point, your own integrity has to tell you that you're not serving the country anymore, you're serving only your own ambition. And that's not a reason to be in the room.
Or is it more important to be independent and on the outside in order to speak truth to power and leave a mark on the public discourse? Donald Trump built a political brand around being unexpected. What will he say? What will he decide? What will he do? The unexpected marked John Bolton's way out. The unexpected was also what brought Kenneth Marcus in. The boldness, the guts to dare and achieve greatness. The Israeli public, according to polls, believes in Trump's unpredictability, believes that it will once again lead to good results. More with Marcus and Greenblatt, less with Bolton.
What will he do? Well, let's bring it now back to Israel and look at a different kind of battle than the current military conflicts here. Now, this particular fight is one that unites Arab and Jewish Israelis in a struggle against a common enemy, a gas-fired power station set to be built right next to the city of Rosh Hashanah, which is just northeast of Tel Aviv, and also near the nearby Arab-majority city of Kfar Qasim. Worried about air and water pollution, accidents, and even enemy attacks, residents there are fighting to stop the construction before the issue is taken up by the High Court next week. Bianca Zanini has that story.
Tel Aviv, Israel's global powerhouse in tech, the economic, multicultural, and technological center of Israel. And all that takes a lot of energy. The Israeli government has approved plans to build the Qasim gas-fired power station, which is expected to start supplying energy to the Tel Aviv area in 2030. But the construction is facing major opposition from government officials and from concerned residents because of its all-too-central location.
This is the area where they're planning to build the power plant. Now you can see behind me those buildings. That's Rosh Hashanah. It's less than 750 meters away. There are kindergartens and schools over there. And this is Kfar Qasim. This town is less than 100 meters away from where they're planning to build the plant. And the citizens of both towns are worried and they're fighting.
About 500,000 people could be affected by the close proximity to the plant. Residents have been protesting the plans for years, and now the High Court will hold a hearing on the petitions filed against the power plant on July 24th. The station will be built near an existing corridor of high transmission power lines and pipes, which already transport natural gas. And in addition, the worry is that the plant will cause air pollution and contaminate the western mountain body of underground water, which provides 30% of the country's drinking water.
The water here is the emergency supply for Israel, and if diesel infiltrates it, it will be destroyed and unusable. What I want to say is, it's impossible to build a power station here, not because it's so close to Rosh Hashanah, but because here, you don't build power stations close to residents and on the largest water deposit in the country.
Investing in a power station to poison this area is a disaster, an ecological disaster. Our fear is that this place will be unusable. We can't live here anymore. It will be abandoned. Instead of investing in renewable energy, in green energy, we're investing in a power station which is already out of date, a gas power station.
When asked about the decision to build a gas-powered plant at this location, the Ministry of Energy referred to the Israeli Planning Administration, which then responded saying that all issues, including safety distances from residential areas, were subject to a public hearing, and that all environmental hazards have been properly addressed. Residents insist the process of approval has been full of errors, and the Health Ministry has written various letters, including one in 2021, recommending not to approve the plan on the basis of harm to the public health, regarding air quality and the quality of drinking water.
The state of Israel has for a long time been seemingly obtuse or unaware that there's a climate crisis. All around the world, the use of natural gas as a fuel for electricity has been phased out because people begin to realize that there is an extremely high carbon footprint associated with the methane emissions associated. That's on a global level. On an immediate level, we now know that there are health impacts from the emissions in the plant. I don't think anybody who proposed this plant would be delighted to have their children exposed to the kind of emissions which come out of a natural gas plant.
And there are other dangers apart from pollution. Former IDF explosives expert Eran Tuval was injured in an explosion caused by hazardous material.
Since this is a facility that uses fossil fuel, basically, old school kind of facility, they must have storage of energetic materials here. They have to have fuels here. They have to have pipelines of fuels coming in. They have turbines, and they have a facility that basically burns this fuel, makes it into gas, high-pressure gas that is supposed to turn turbines, and there's a whole shebang of chemical reactions going here.
As tensions between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon continue to grow, so does the risk of a full-scale war. And Israel's electrical grid, including a power plant in the center of the country, could easily be a target.
Which makes more sense given the fact that we face such strategic problems? To have a plant, a large plant, which Nasrallah and Hezbollah can see just as clearly as you and me, or to have thousands of small generators on roofs with microgrids, which give us much greater resilience in the system.
But in the midst of all the fighting against pollution, terror, hate, the story of this power plant has become a story of people coming together, of Arabs and Jews joining forces in a moment where unity between those two neighbors is a rarity.
You can find the imam from the mosque, which sit next of Rabbi from Rosh Hashanah in the same way. Children from all of the regions will encounter together in order to struggle together.
Because we live in a democratic Israel, and he is with the same blue ID as me, so my rights and his rights to have secured life and health and a good place to live without all those pollutions are quite equal, and there is no reason why we won't cooperate and stand together against something that's going to hurt us.
The residents of the two towns are vowing to continue this fight together.
And that ends our program for this evening. Of course, you can continue to watch us on our website and also our various social media sites. That ends the programs for this week. Have a great weekend. Continue to watch I-24 News. Let's see the hostages returned as soon as possible. Thanks for joining us.